The alien guard captain stood in the center of the courtyard, his tall figure covered in silver armor that reflected the twin suns above. His voice echoed through the crowd as he pointed at the human standing calmly near the edge. The captain's words were filled with pride and anger. "I demand a duel!" he shouted. The aliens around him cheered and pounded their weapons against the stone floor. They believed their captain was the strongest of all, and no outsider could ever match his skill. The human, however, did not flinch. He looked almost ordinary compared to the towering aliens. He wore no shining armor, only simple clothes, his face calm, his hands relaxed at his sides. Yet his eyes were sharp, watching every move. The crowd expected him to back away, to shake his head, to refuse such a deadly challenge. But instead he let out a small smile, the kind of smile that confused everyone. Then, with a steady voice, he said, "I accept." The silence that followed was heavier than any roar. The aliens blinked. Their laughter froze in their throats. They were used to enemies begging for mercy, not smiling, not accepting so easily. The guard captain narrowed his eyes. He had fought many battles, but never had anyone answered him with such calm words. It made him feel uneasy, though he did not show it. He raised his blade high, its sharp edge glimmering, and shouted again, "Then tomorrow at sunrise, the duel will take place." Rumors spread quickly through the city. Aliens whispered in the markets, in the taverns, in the training halls. They all spoke of the strange human who dared to stand against the captain. Many laughed and said the human would be crushed within seconds. Others wondered if there was something hidden behind that smile. Some even feared it, because no one sane would accept such a challenge unless they had something powerful to show. That night the captain prepared his armor and sharpened his blade. His pride was too great to imagine defeat. He told himself the human was nothing more than a fool who would regret his words. But still, deep inside his chest, a question stirred. Why had the human looked so calm? Why had he smiled instead of trembling? The thought lingered like a shadow he could not shake off. The human, on the other hand, did not spend the night with weapons or armor. He sat quietly under the stars, his hands resting on his knees, his breathing slow and steady. He remembered the places he had trained, the worlds harsher than this one, the battles where survival meant reading every move of the enemy before it came. The scars on his body were proof of countless struggles. Tomorrow was only another test, another fight where fear could not exist. When the first light of sunrise touched the city, the arena was already full. Aliens crowded every seat, their voices mixing in excitement and disbelief. They wanted to see the human fall, to see their captain prove once again that no other being could stand against him. The drums of battle began to beat, heavy and loud, each strike shaking the air. The guard captain walked proudly into the arena, his armor shining, his weapon ready. He lifted his blade and saluted the crowd. Cheers answered him like thunder. Then he turned his gaze toward the other side, where the human was slowly walking forward. No armor, no weapon, only his steady eyes and that same faint smile. The crowd laughed. They thought it was madness. But for some reason, a shiver ran through the air, as if the fight ahead was not as simple as they believed. The two figures stood face to face, the alien captain strong and proud, the human calm and unreadable. The drum stopped, the silence returned, and in that silence the true challenge began. The arena was a massive circle of stone carved into the heart of the alien city. Its walls were high and scarred with the marks of many battles fought before. Banners of the guard captain's victories hung across the arches, and every seat was filled with aliens eager to witness the duel. Their voices rumbled like thunder, a living wave of noise that shook the ground itself. They had come to see blood, to see their champion crush the human who had dared to smile in the face of death. The ground of the arena was rough and broken, dark sand mixed with traces of old battles. The smell of iron still clung to the air above. The twin suns poured down light that made every weapon gleam. The guard captain entered first, his silver armor shining as if he carried the pride of his entire species on his back. He raised his blade toward the sky, and the crowd roared his name, chanting it again and again. The sound echoed until it seemed the city itself was alive. From the opposite gate came the human, his steps slow but steady. He wore no armor, no grand colors. His clothes were plain, his hands empty. Yet the way he walked made the air grow still. Some aliens sneered, calling him a fool, but others felt an unease crawl through their skin. They had seen warriors full of rage, fear, and pride. But this human carried none of those. His calm was unnatural, and his faint smile was more terrifying than any weapon. The announcer, an elder alien with a deep, booming voice, stepped forward to declare the rules. "The duel shall be fought until one can no longer stand," his voice carried across the arena. "No mercy, no retreat, only victory or defeat," the crowd erupted again. But even their cheers could not break the strange tension growing in the center where the two fighters stood. The captain pointed his blade toward the human. His voice sharp. "You will regret this day," he said. His pride overflowing, but the human tilted his head slightly, his smile unchanged. "We'll see," he replied, his words soft. Yet they carried to the farthest edge of the arena, making every alien fall silent for a moment. The drums began to beat again, slow at first, then faster, each strike like a heartbeat of the arena itself. The crowd stomped their feet in rhythm, shaking the stone beneath them. The captain's eyes glowed with confidence. But deep inside he felt something he had not felt in years, a flicker of doubt. He pushed it aside, gripping his blade tighter. As the duel prepared to start, the human bent his knees slightly, his body loose but balanced, like water ready to flow wherever it needed. His eyes locked on the captain, not with fear, but with a strange kind of focus that made even the captain's heart beat faster. The crowd noticed this too, some whispering that the human looked more like a predator than prey. The signal was given. A horn blast echoed across the arena. The fight had begun. The captain moved first, his speed a blur as his blade cut through the air. It was a strike that had ended dozens of battles before, meant to overwhelm the enemy in one blow. But the human stepped aside with ease, the blade missing him by inches. The sound of steel cutting the air was followed by gasps from the crowd. The human's hand moved, not to strike, but to tap the captain's wrist as he passed, a small movement, yet it forced the captain's swing to falter. The aliens in the stands shouted in surprise. Their champion had never been touched so easily before. The captain snarled, turning back with fury, his pride burning hotter than the suns above. But the human only adjusted his stance again, calm and unreadable, as if this was not a fight, but a dance he had already learned by heart. The tension rose, the crowd's cheers mixed with confusion, and even the announcer leaned forward. His eyes wide, the first exchange was over, and already the aliens felt something they had never expected. Fear, not for their captain, but of the human who faced him without armor, without weapons, and yet stood stronger than any of them had imagined. The arena shook with the sound of alien voices, the crowd roared for blood. Yet inside the circle of sand, everything had grown quiet. The human stood without a weapon, his chest rising and falling slowly, while the guard captain gripped his blade so tight that his knuckles turned pale beneath his thick skin. Pride demanded he end this fight quickly, but the human's calm eyes made his hands sweat inside the gauntlets. The captain lunged forward, his blade flashing in the sunlight. The sound of steel cutting through the air was sharp and deadly. It was a strike he had used countless times, enough to slice through stone. But the human moved at the last instant, a step so small and so perfect that the blade missed his side by the width of a breath. The crowd gasped, unable to understand how a fragile creature could avoid a blow meant to kill. The human did not counter with force. Instead, he brushed his fingers across the captain's wrist. A gentle tap, yet it threw the alien's balance off. The captain stumbled a single step, and for the first time in years, he felt the shame of losing control. Rage burned in his chest, but under it was something worse, doubt. The crowd shouted louder, some in anger, some in shock. The aliens had believed the human would be crushed instantly. Yet the human was still standing, smiling faintly as if nothing had happened. It was not arrogance in his smile. It was something else, something the captain could not read, and that mystery gnawed at him more than the missed strike. The captain attacked again, faster, his blade slicing in a deadly pattern. Sparks flying as it scraped across the stone floor, dust rising into the air, the sound echoing off the arena walls. Still, the human avoided every strike, his movement smooth, almost lazy. He was not faster than the captain, but every step, every shift of his body was made a moment before the attack came, as if he already knew where the blade would fall. The announcer leaned forward in disbelief, whispering words that were carried by the wind. "He reads him," the elder said. "The human reads his moves," the crowd murmured in confusion. their voices breaking into nervous whispers. Could it be true that this strange outsider could predict the strikes of their greatest warrior? The captain's pride screamed against it. He raised his blade high and brought it down with full force. The sand erupted beneath the impact. But when the dust cleared, the human was not there. He was standing just behind the captain, calm as ever. The crowd gasped again, the sound like a wave crashing across the arena. The human spoke then, his voice steady but not loud. "You are strong," he said, "but strength is not enough." His words carried a weight that pierced through the roar of the crowd. The captain turned, his chest heaving, his pride cracking like glass. Those words were not a taunt. They were truth, and he hated them. The captain let out a roar, fury taking control. He charged with both hands gripping his blade, his strikes faster, harder, reckless. The air filled with sparks as steel scraped stone again and again. Yet no matter how wild or powerful the attacks became, the human remained untouched, his movements controlled, his eyes sharp, his breathing calm. The crowd no longer cheered. Their voices lowered into murmurs of fear. The duel was no longer a show of pride. It was becoming something else, something darker. The human's calm was not weakness, it was power. And for the first time in their lives, the aliens saw their strongest warrior forced to chase an enemy who moved as if the fight was already over. The first clash was not marked by blood or victory. It was marked by silence, a silence heavier than any roar. The silence of realization. The guard captain, the pride of his people, was facing an enemy unlike any he had ever known, and the human, smiling faintly under the twin suns, looked as if he had only just begun. The guard captain's chest rose and fell heavily. Sweat shone beneath his armor. He had never needed to fight this long against any opponent. His people whispered that he was unbeatable, but the human's calm eyes were breaking that image piece by piece. Pride alone could no longer carry him, so he decided to unleash what most had never seen before. The captain planted his blade into the ground, sparks bursting as it struck the stone. He closed his eyes and drew on the energy that only the highest guards were trained to use. His armor shifted as glowing lines lit across it like fire veins. The ground around his feet cracked. Sand lifting into the air, the crowd gasped in awe. For this was the hidden technique, a power forbidden in ordinary duels. It turned a warrior into a storm of raw force. The human stood still, watching, his faint smile unchanged. But deep in his chest, his heartbeat slowed, not from fear, but from focus. He had seen this before, not from these aliens, but from others across the stars, creatures who also thought raw power could crush skill. He bent his knees slightly, lowering his stance, ready to move. The captain opened his eyes, and they burned like molten fire. With a roar, he pulled his blade free, the weapon now blazing with energy. When he swung it, the air itself seemed to split. A wave of force ripped across the arena, cutting through the sand and smashing against the far wall. Stone cracked and dust rained down on the crowd. Cheers rose in shock. They thought the human had been destroyed. But when the dust cleared, the human was still there, a few paces away from where the strike had landed. His clothes torn slightly, but his body unharmed. He had moved at the very last breath of time, his steps leaving only faint prints in the sand. The crowd fell silent. Their champion had revealed his secret power. Yet the human still stood. The captain's rage grew. His strikes came faster now, waves of energy slicing through the arena floor, sand exploding upward like fountains of fire. But each time the human moved, sometimes with a sidestep, sometimes with a lean so small it looked impossible. His movements were not rushed, not desperate. They were exact, chosen, as if he had walked this battle 100 times before. The human's eyes narrowed, memories flashing in his mind, not of this arena but of places far worse. Dark training grounds on forgotten worlds, battlefields where the weak were erased before sunrise. He remembered facing beasts with skin like steel, machines that learned every strike he made, storms that tore apart soldiers by the dozen. It was in those places he had learned the truth. Strength was nothing without control. The captain roared louder, frustration breaking through his pride. His armor's glow pulsed violently, each swing of his blade louder than thunder. But in his fury he missed the details. He missed how the human's feet traced small circles in the sand, how his eyes studied every twitch of muscle. Every breath before the strike, the crowd did not see it. But the human was already inside the rhythm of the alien's power. Then it happened. The captain swung with all his force, his blade blazing like lightning, but the human stepped forward instead of back. His hand touched the captain's wrist again, only this time he twisted, guiding the force not into himself, but into the ground. The blade struck the sand and stuck there. Buried deep from its own weight, the shockwaves shook the arena. But the captain was off balance. Kneeling for the first time before his enemy, gasps filled the arena. The sight was impossible, their captain, glowing with forbidden power, brought to his knees by a human without a weapon. The human stood over him, his voice calm. "Power without control is only noise," he said. His words simple, but they cut deeper than any blade. The captain growled, forcing himself back up, his pride refusing to accept defeat. But the image of the human standing above him, untouched, burned into every eye in the arena, and the whispers began. Whispers that the alien storm might not be enough to break the human's calm. The arena was no longer filled with cheers, only silence mixed with heavy breaths from thousands of watchers. The guard captain stood with his blade shaking in his hands, his glowing armor flickering like a dying fire. Across from him, the human remained steady, dust clinging to his skin, his chest rising slowly, his faint smile still there. The crowd could not believe what they were seeing. Their champion was no longer untouchable. The captain let out a roar that echoed off the stone walls. He would not allow this shame. Pride burned hotter than reason. He launched himself forward with all the fury left inside him. His blade arcing down with crushing force, the ground split as the steel met stone. And this time the human moved too late. A shallow cut opened across his arm. Blood spilled bright against his pale skin. Gasps filled the arena. The aliens shouted in triumph. Their voices rising again, they pointed at the blood, believing the fight had finally turned, believing their captain had proven his strength. The captain's chest swelled with pride once more, his eyes gleaming with satisfaction. But then the human looked at the wound, his expression unchanged, no pain in his face, no fear in his eyes, only calm acceptance. He raised his arm slowly, blood dripping down his hand, and tightened his fist as if the injury was nothing more than a scratch. He met the captain's gaze and whispered, just loud enough for him to hear. Finally, the captain's smile faltered. Confusion crept into his chest. Why would the human welcome pain? Why would he look almost satisfied before the captain could think further? The human stepped forward, fast and sharp, his hand catching the alien's blade mid-swing. The steel bit into his palm, blood dripping between his fingers. But his grip did not loosen. With one twist of his body, he wrenched the weapon free. The blade clattered against the stone floor, echoing like thunder. The arena froze. Their champion disarmed before their eyes. The human tossed the blade aside, the sound ringing longer than the cheers that followed. The captain staggered back, empty hands raised in shock. His armor's glow dimming completely. The crowd could no longer cheer. They could only whisper in disbelief. The human stepped closer, his calm presence heavier than any weapon. His voice cut through the silence. "You bleed me, but you cannot break me," he said. His words plain, but in them was a strength that pressed down on every alien heart in the stands. The captain roared again, throwing himself forward with his bare hands. He struck with fists strong enough to break stone. His punches fast and wild, but the human slipped past each one. His movements sharp, precise, his eyes reading every motion before it began. Finally the human struck back, not with fury, but with control. A single blow to the chest that sent the captain crashing to his knees once more. The crowd gasped again, louder than before. The image was undeniable now. Their champion had drawn blood, yet he had lost more. The human stood bleeding, but unshaken, while the captain knelt. His breath ragged, his pride shattered, whispers spread like fire through the stands. "The human is stronger," they murmured. "The human cannot be broken." The captain lifted his head, his eyes burning with shame and fury. But when he looked at the human, standing tall despite his wound, he felt something he had never felt before in battle. Not hatred, not anger, but fear. The turning point had come. The fight was no longer about victory or pride. It was about truth. And the truth was that a human, standing with nothing but calm and willpower, had already won the respect of a galaxy that once believed he was weak. The arena floor was cracked and stained with dust and blood. The guard captain knelt on one knee, his chest heaving as his strength drained from him. His blade lay far away, half buried in sand. The glow of his armor had faded to nothing. His people watched in silence, thousands of eyes wide with disbelief. Their greatest warrior was beaten down, yet the human still stood tall. A thin line of blood dripping from his arm, but his face calm. The human walked forward slowly, every step echoing louder than the roars of any crowd. The aliens leaned forward, expecting the end. They believed the human would take the blade and strike, that he would finish the fight with one clean blow. Their champion would fall, and the duel would end in death. That was the way of their tradition. But the human had never followed their ways. He stopped in front of the captain, his shadow falling across the alien's face. The crowd held its breath. The human bent down and picked up the blade. The steel heavy and scarred, he lifted it with one hand. His blood still dripping onto the hilt, the sight was terrifying and beautiful. A fragile creature, holding the weapon of their strongest guard. The silence of the moment was deeper than thunder. The captain raised his head slowly, his pride refusing to let him bow. His eyes burned with fury. "Do it," he hissed. "End it," his voice cracked with anger and shame. He could not imagine life after this defeat, but the human only looked at him, his calm eyes cutting deeper than any blade. Then the human did the unthinkable. He lowered the weapon and dropped it into the sand. The sound of the steel hitting the ground echoed across the arena. Sharper than any strike, sharper than any roar, the crowd gasped. Their voices mixing into confusion, no warrior had ever refused the final strike. No one had ever walked away when victory was in their hands. The human spoke then, his voice soft but steady. "You wanted to test me," he said. "You have your answer." His words were simple, yet they struck every heart in the arena. The captain stared at him, confusion and shame battling inside his chest. He expected death but received something far worse. "Mercy!" The captain's fists clenched, his body shaking, yet he could not rise. The strength in his arms and legs was gone, and so was the fire of his pride. He looked up at the human again, and for the first time in his life he lowered his head, not out of defeat but out of respect. The crowd erupted, not with cheers, but with cries of disbelief and awe. Some shouted that the duel was broken. Others whispered that something greater had just happened. The human had not only defeated their champion, he had changed the meaning of victory. The announcer stood frozen, his voice caught in his throat. He had called many duels. He had watched warriors fall and die, but he had never seen one walk away, never seen one choose mercy when the chance of glory was in their grasp. The human turned his back on the captain, leaving the weapon buried in sand. He walked toward the gates, each step slow and steady. His calm unbroken, the aliens watched, unable to look away, every eye filled with questions, every heart unsettled. The captain remained kneeling, his chest heavy, yet his mind clear for the first time. He understood then that this human had given him something no warrior had ever given. Respect without killing. Honor without pride, he whispered softly, though no one could hear. Stronger than us. And in that moment, the final strike was not the one that cut flesh. It was the one that shattered pride, the strike of mercy, the strike that turned an enemy into something greater, a legend. The arena gates closed behind the human, yet the silence inside the Colosseum lingered like smoke after fire. Thousands of aliens sat frozen in their seats, their eyes wide, their voices trapped. They had come expecting to see a fragile creature destroyed. Instead, they had witnessed their strongest warrior brought to his knees. Not by a killing blow, but by mercy. The guard captain remained kneeling in the sand, his chest rising and falling as dust clung to his armor. The weapon still lay where the human had dropped it. Half buried, unwanted, the captain stared at it, his pride aching more than his wounds, yet inside him a strange clarity began to form. This duel had not ended his honor. It had redefined it. The crowd finally began to murmur, whispers spreading faster than fire. The human spared him, some said. He could have killed him but chose not to, others added. The whispers carried into every corner of the city. Then beyond its walls, traveling through markets, taverns and barracks, the story of the duel became a storm that no wall could contain. By nightfall, messengers carried the tale to distant worlds. Alien officers repeated it in hushed tones, merchants told it with trembling voices, and soldiers questioned everything they once believed. The humans, a race mocked for their fragile bodies, now carried a reputation sharper than steel. Stronger than fire, they were no longer seen as weak. They were seen as something different, something unpredictable. The guard captain walked out of the arena long after the crowd had left, his steps heavy, but his mind heavier. When his people approached him, expecting him to hide his shame, he did the unthinkable. He bowed his head and said, "The human won." His words shocked them more than the duel itself. Yet no one dared to challenge them because they had seen it with their own eyes. Across the stars, the tale grew. In some places it was told as a warning. Do not underestimate the humans. In others it was told as respect. They fight with more than weapons. They fight with will. Even enemies who had never met a human began to whisper about them. Their name carried on the winds of rumor. The human himself did not celebrate. He walked through the city streets quietly, his arm bandaged, his expression calm. When strangers bowed their heads, he gave them no speeches, no pride. He carried himself the same as he had in the duel, calm, steady, unshaken, and that made the people respect him even more. The captain found him again days later, standing near the city walls at sunrise. The alien warrior approached slowly, without armor, without weapons. He stood beside the human in silence for a long time. Finally he said, "You could have killed me," his voice low. Heavy, the human did not look at him, only whispered, "Killing proves nothing." Those words settled into the captain's heart like a blade that never left. From that day, the guard captain no longer saw the human as an enemy. He saw him as something greater. He began to speak of him not with bitterness, but with respect, calling him not just a fighter, but a teacher, and the people listened. The galaxy remembered the duel not for the clash of steel, but for the moment a human smiled at death and chose mercy instead of pride. It became a lesson that echoed through generations, a story whispered by soldiers before battle, a tale parents told their children by firelight. And though the human never claimed victory, never raised his hands to celebrate, his calm smile lived forever in the memory of all who saw him. The day he accepted the duel and changed the stars,